the certificate of death. From the very beginning, the official information surrounding Anna Kepner's death has been almost non-existent. The FBI has remained completely silent. The medical examiner has not released the cause or manner of death, and the cruise line has provided no updates. What is publicly confirmed amounts to only two facts: Anna died on November 7th, and Anna was discovered on the ship. Everything else, the motive, the sequence of events, and the identity of the suspect, remains a blank space. In stark contrast, the family has been the primary source of fragmented details, many of which contradict one another. For example, Anna's grandparents initially described her relationship with her stepbrother as very close, like two peas in a pod, a statement heavily criticized by the true crime community given that Anna was murdered inside the same shared cabin as this stepbrother. Their account of Anna's final moments is also inconsistent. At first, they claim
Anna wasn't feeling well. She just said, "Mima, I think I'm going to go back to my room for a little bit."
Yet moments later in the same interview, they recounted that Anna returned, changed her clothes, went down to the casino, and said, "Ma, I love you guys. I'll see you later." When asked when they last saw Anna, their answers did not match the timeline they themselves had described. The grandparents also revealed that, when the ship docked, the stepbrother was
psychosis state. They couldn't be helped, and so they needed to go to the hospital for that kind of breakdown that they were suffering from.
This is the first time anyone from the family publicly described the suspect's extreme mental state, despite the fact that authorities have not released any such information. In short, while official sources remain completely silent, the family's statements, though valuable, are riddled with contradictions and inconsistencies. This disparity not only deepens the mystery, but also heightens suspicions surrounding what truly happened to Anna Kepner. In deaths that occur at sea and involve ships docking in Florida, the death investigation and certification process typically runs through the Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's Office, District 11. This agency has jurisdiction over all non-natural deaths that occur in international waters once the vessel arrives at port. However, the system contains a major legal loophole: any death classified as a potential homicide and placed under FBI investigation can remain pending indefinitely, allowing a public death certificate to be issued without a listed cause or manner of death. This is exactly what happened in the case of Anna Kepner. When Fox 35 obtained her death certificate, they confirmed
how she died. Still no manner of death, still no cause of death, and so there are still a lot of questions surrounding that as the investigation continues.
Another legal gap stems from Florida's public records structure. Death certificates are public documents, but when a criminal investigation is active, or when related court proceedings are incomplete or sealed, the most critical sections, cause of death and manner of death, are deliberately left blank. This leads to an unusual situation, as seen in Anna's case, where the certificate includes full identifying information and even states that the remains has already been cremated, yet omits the single most important fact the public expects to see. Meanwhile, the family has paradoxically revealed more information than the authorities themselves.
From it is that her body has been cremated after her death. What we don't know, though, document, which is what this is, does not include how she died. Still no manner of death.
This highlights a troubling contradiction. Official agencies can withhold the entire criminal context, while the family, through unrelated custody battles and court filings, unintentionally releases key investigative clues into the public domain. This process has not only deepened the mystery surrounding Anna's death, but also exposed significant procedural weaknesses in how Miami-Dade handles death certification for suspected homicides at sea. The decision to cremate Anna Kepner's remains just 6 days after she was discovered has become one of the most controversial details of the case. In situations involving unexplained or suspicious deaths, especially those occurring at sea under FBI jurisdiction, families typically wait for the full autopsy results before making final decisions regarding the handling of the remains. In this instance, however, cremation proceeded even though the cause and manner of death had not been released, and critical portions of the forensic report remained incomplete. What raises additional concerns is that the family appears to possess and publicly share more fragments of information than any official agency. Their statements and legal filings suggest a level of certainty that contrasts sharply with the silence from investigators, creating a discrepancy that prompts further scrutiny. This imbalance makes the accelerated cremation more troubling, as it could have inadvertently, or, as some speculate, intentionally, destroyed secondary evidence that often becomes relevant only after initial findings are reviewed. Another crucial factor involves the circumstances under which Anna's remains was found.
The room steward that was going in to clean the room is the one that found her,
indicating that the cabin steward, not any member of the family, discovered the remains. This raises pointed questions. Why did no one in the cabin notice her absence for so many hours? Why did no family member initiate a search? And how could someone outside the family be the first to uncover her concealed remains? Taken together, the absence of publicly available forensic data, the unusually rapid cremation timeline, and the inconsistencies in the family's accounts, the possibility that secondary evidence may have been lost or destroyed becomes a significant issue. It is no longer mere speculation, but a structural gap that demands deeper examination within the broader investigative process. In homicide cases involving manual restraint or neck compression, especially the technique known as a bar hold, forensic examiners typically look for two symmetrical bruises or linear impressions on the neck or collarbone. These marks are crucial in distinguishing accidental airway obstruction from intentional force. In the case of Anna Kepner, however, any information related to injuries has been completely absent from the public record. The released death certificate lists no cause of death, no manner of death, and provides no description of trauma whatsoever. Compounding the concern is the unusually swift cremation, which occurred only 6 days after Anna was found. Once cremation is performed, secondary injury assessments, such as delayed bruising patterns, subtle soft tissue damage, or pressure marks consistent with a bar hold, become impossible. In such circumstances, broad terminology like mechanical asphyxia can be used as a catch-all descriptor, covering scenarios ranging from accidental airway compromise to forceful neck compression, without revealing the precise mechanism. An additional forensic red flag lies in the condition and location of the remains when discovered.
She was found concealed under the bed.
Concealment is rarely associated with nonviolent or accidental deaths. Instead, it typically implies deliberate staging or an attempt to hide physical evidence, a behavior inconsistent with any scenario other than foul play. When the forensic report remains silent, the body is cremated before independent review, and key observations are missing from public documentation. Vague phrasing like mechanical asphyxia, say if used in the official report, can function as a way to obscure the underlying trauma. In cases such as this, where bruising patterns could point directly to a hands-on assault, the absence of detail becomes as meaningful as the presence of injury itself. In unexplained or suspicious deaths occurring on cruise ships, especially cases involving minors, the toxicology report is typically one of the first components processed. In Miami-Dade, toxicology results in potential homicide cases generally take 7-10 days, and no more than 14 days even when extended panels are required. However, in Anna Kepner's case, the pending status has stretched beyond 21 days, surpassing all standard timelines and becoming one of the slowest toxicology turnarounds on record. This delay becomes especially troubling when placed in the broader context of the investigation. The report explicitly emphasizes the complete absence of communication from authorities. The FBI have been silent. When both the medical examiner and the FBI refuse to release even minimal updates, an unusually stalled toxicology report raises the question of whether this is a technical delay, or whether the findings contain sensitive information capable of reshaping the entire case. A plausible explanation is that the report may have detected substances associated with sedation, psychoactive effects, or abnormal alcohol levels, results that could significantly shift the narrative of what happened that night. This possibility becomes even more relevant given that the Stepson was hospitalized immediately after the ship docked and was described as being in an extreme psychological state. If toxicology reveals the presence of stimulants, sedatives, or hallucinogenic compounds, the connection between the suspect's mental condition and Anna's death would become far more concrete. When these elements are assembled, rapid cremation, an incomplete death certificate, the concealed body, and a toxicology report delayed far beyond normal parameters, the question is no longer simply, Why is it slow? But rather lie. What exactly are they trying to keep buried during these 21 days?
And they are saying that this stepson allegedly told them he had no idea what happened in that cruise ship. That is what the grandparents.
Statements like this can directly influence how the medical examiner handles the case, as federal agencies often request that all forensics remain sealed until interviews with witnesses and potential suspects are complete. In this context, Dr. Vallejo's silence may signal the presence of an investigative hold, a legitimate mechanism allowing the FBI to temporarily freeze the release of forensic information. Thus, Vallejo's withholding of all public findings reflects more than caution. It suggests the interplay of competing pressures, with Carnival seeking to protect its image and the FBI determined to maintain investigative secrecy. The medical examiner becomes the point of convergence for both forces, and the result is a complete blackout of forensic data in Anna's case. To understand how unusual the Anna Kepner case truly is, it must be compared to other cruise ship homicide investigations handled between 2018 and 2024. Across this period, at least 5 suspicious deaths were processed by U.S. medical examiners after vessels docked in Miami, Port Canaveral, or Fort Lauderdale. All 5 cases, even those involving active FBI investigations, had publicly released causes of death within 7 to 10 days. These cases included a woman pushed from a balcony, 29 ME confirmed blunt force trauma after 6 days. A fight-related homicide aboard Royal Caribbean, manual strangulation disclosed in 9 days. A cabin stabbing on Norwegian, 2021, sharp force injuries released after 7 days. A fatal OD with signs of assault, 2022, confirmed cause in 8 days. A minor's suspicious death aboard Carnival, 2023, full many findings released within 10 days. The consistent thread across these cases is this: even if the FBI continued its criminal investigation or withheld certain details, the medical examiner still provided an official cause promptly, without extended delays. The consistent thread across these cases is this: even if the FBI continued its criminal investigation or withheld certain details, the medical examiner still provided an official cause promptly, without extended delays. By contrast, the Kepner case has exceeded 3 weeks with no determination of cause, coinciding with an aggressive legal push to restrict public access to related documents. The report notes
On whether or not the judge involved is going to put that gag order, is going to seal the case.
In previous cases, no family sought to seal unrelated court proceedings or prevent the release of forensic information. This broader comparison makes one fact undeniable: Anna's case is the only one in 6 years where the cause of death remains entirely undisclosed more than 20 days later. Such a deviation cannot be explained by routine procedure. It strongly signals the presence of legally sensitive evidence or a criminal scenario so serious that the medical examiner is unable, or not permitted, to release findings within the standard timeframe. Who are they protecting? One of the most troubling aspects of the Anna Kepner case is the prolonged silence surrounding the identity of the suspect, even though investigators reportedly have access to clear and time-stamped video footage from the cruise ship. In typical homicide or suspicious death investigations aboard cruise vessels, surveillance footage is among the first pieces of evidence reviewed, as cruise ships are equipped with extensive hallway, elevator, and deck cameras specifically designed to track movement. In past cases, this footage has allowed authorities to identify suspects within 48-72 hours. Yet in Anna's case, more than 20 days have passed without officials naming a suspect, a delay that stands in stark contrast to standard investigative timelines. What makes the silence even more striking is the growing evidence that the investigative focus has already narrowed. The report notes that VO2 to 4 forward and Thursday there. This hospitalization immediately upon arrival suggests that authorities had already identified him as a central figure and sought rapid medical and forensic evaluation. The absence of an official announcement is therefore unlikely to stem from a lack of clarity. Instead, several factors may explain the delay. The FBI typically withholds naming suspects in cases involving minors, mental health emergencies, or potential federal charges. Additionally, if the surveillance footage shows events occurring inside or near a cabin occupied by minors, investigators may be taking extraordinary steps to ensure the footage is reviewed carefully and to avoid procedural errors that could affect future prosecution. However, the ongoing refusal to release even basic information has left the public relying almost entirely on family court filings, not law enforcement updates. This creates an unusual dynamic in which the public knows a suspect exists, and that video evidence likely confirms their involvement, but federal authorities remain silent due to legal sensitivity rather than investigative uncertainty. In the United States, cases involving a juvenile suspect in a potential homicide on international waters follow a highly structured federal protocol. Cruise ships fall under a hybrid jurisdiction. The FBI leads the criminal investigation, the Coast Guard handles immediate maritime authority, and the local medical examiner classifies the death once the ship docks. When the potential offender is a minor, federal law imposes even stricter safeguards, including mandatory psychological evaluation, rapid evidence preservation, and time-sensitive reporting requirements to prevent contamination or tampering. However, in the death of Anna Kepner, nearly every pillar of this established framework has collapsed. The first major breach involves the handling of the crime scene. According to the report in Standard Protocol, once a juvenile homicide is suspected, all minors present in the cabin must be isolated immediately, interviewed separately, and prevented from re-entering the scene. Yet early details indicate that the cabin was not secured in a timely manner, and that crucial evidence may have been compromised before federal agents ever boarded the vessel. Another structural failure lies in the timeline. Under federal maritime guidelines, investigators must make an initial classification: accident, suspicious death, or potential homicide within 72 hours. In Anna's case, more than 20 days have passed without even a provisional statement. Additionally, federal protocol requires that the juvenile suspect undergo a forensic medical and psychological assessment within 24 hours. Although the Stepson was hospitalized shortly after docking, details surrounding the purpose and outcome of that hospitalization remain completely undisclosed, undermining transparency. The most serious breach is the prolonged withholding of information. Federal law anticipates delays in prosecution for minors, but not delays in publicly classifying the nature of the death. By abandoning established timelines, communication requirements, and crime scene procedures, the case diverges sharply from every known precedent of juvenile-related homicide at sea, suggesting that legal pressure, institutional hesitation, or sensitive evidence may be driving the unprecedented silence. In any suspected homicide aboard a cruise ship, especially when a remains is found concealed, the cabin where the victim is discovered must be immediately sealed under standard FBI and Coast Guard investigative protocols. The cabin is treated as the primary crime scene, containing crucial evidence such as DNA, fingerprints, fibers, soft tissue traces, drag patterns, repositioned objects, and signs of cleanup or staging. Any delay in sealing the scene risks destroying or altering essential forensic evidence. Yet cabin 1-408, where Anna was found hidden under the bed, covered with blankets and life jackets, was not sealed until 46 hours after the ship had already docked. This represents a severe procedural breach, as the cabin remained accessible to cleaning staff, maintenance crews, and potentially even passengers if the area was reopened for turnover between voyages. The delayed lockdown introduces three major legal and forensic failures. First, it constitutes a direct violation of FBI evidence preservation standards for unexplained deaths. If a crime scene is not secured within hours, ordinary ship operations can erase or overwrite critical physical traces. Second, leaving the cabin unsecured for nearly 2 days allows for significant contamination, including footprints, fabric fibers, fingerprints from unrelated individuals, and shifted objects. With multiple people entering and exiting, distinguishing between meaningful evidence and irrelevant interference becomes nearly impossible. Third, the hesitancy to seal the cabin, despite Anna being found in a clearly concealed position, signals either a lack of urgency in preserving the scene or, more concerningly, a deliberate delay that reduces the likelihood of recovering incriminating evidence. The 46-hour gap before securing cabin 408 is not a trivial oversight. It represents a serious procedural breakdown in a case with unmistakable signs of foul play, and undermines the integrity of the investigation from the very start. In maritime homicide investigations, especially those involving minors, the FBI typically assigns an agent with extensive experience handling complex and sensitive cases. The Anna Kepner investigation appears to follow that pattern, with Special Agent Jonathan Bernstein reportedly taking the lead. Almost immediately, however, his name became the subject of public discussion, not because of any official allegation, but because online communities began linking him, speculatively, to several high-profile federal inquiries he may or may not have taken part in. There are no official documents confirming his involvement in the Epstein investigation on Little St. James. Still, the very appearance of his name in public conversations surrounding past major cases reflects a predictable trend. When a current investigation is unusually opaque, the public turns to the backgrounds of its investigators in an effort to understand the silence. These questions do not arise from verified connections, but from the broader context of the Kepner case. With no cause of death released, a toxicology report in prolonged delay, a death certificate left incomplete, and custody court filings becoming the only source of new information, it is not surprising that attention shifts toward those overseeing the investigation. In situations where institutions withhold updates, the public naturally scrutinizes the investigators' histories to infer what might be happening behind the scenes. Rather than interpreting these discussions as accusations, it is more accurate to view them as symptoms of a larger issue. The more opaque the investigation becomes, the more intensely the public examines the individuals involved. In this sense, the speculation surrounding S.A. Bernstein reflects not his personal background, but the unprecedented lack of transparency surrounding the Kepner case itself. It is the vacuum of official information, not the agent's record, that has allowed these questions to gain traction. Before the gag order request was submitted to the court, one of the most prominent questions raised by the public was whether discreet communication had already occurred between the FBI and the private attorney representing the Kepner-Hudson family. This is not an accusation, but rather a natural reaction to the unusual information vacuum surrounding the case, contrasted with the rapid and preemptive legal actions taken by the family. The report makes clear that one of the earliest motions did not come from the FBI, but from the family's side. They want that case sealed. A sealing request is uncommon in cases where the cause of death has not yet been determined, and even less typical situations involving an unresolved potential homicide. The sudden push from the Hudson side to restrict public access, while the FBI had not released a single official update, led many observers to speculate that the family might have been informed of investigative developments or sensitive details not yet accessible to the public. In standard protocol, the FBI does not share specific findings with representatives of a juvenile suspect in order to avoid compromising evidence. Yet the accelerated pace of the family's legal actions, transitioning quickly from statements of protection to media-limiting measures, and finally to attempts at sealing unrelated civil filings, suggests they may have been acting with a degree of strategic foresight. It is important to emphasize that this does not constitute evidence of coordination. Instead, it illustrates how the information void has created the perception of possible confidential exchanges. When the FBI remains silent, the medical examiner remains silent, and the cruise line remains silent. But the family moves aggressively to shut down public access. The timing becomes conspicuous. Ultimately, it is the opacity of the investigation, rather than any document or statement, that has fueled public suspicion that private communications may have occurred before the gag order was requested. Cruise ships, operating in international waters, fall under a complex web of overlapping jurisdictions. While the FBI can assert authority once a U.S. citizen is harmed, certain categories of records, including the full passenger manifest and registration documents, technically remain under the flag state's control. In the case of the Carnival Horizon, that jurisdiction belongs to Panama. Under maritime law, federal agents may request these documents formally, but doing so triggers a lengthy diplomatic process that involves the Panamanian Maritime Authority, the ship's registry office, and the International Maritime Organization. Given the already unusual silence around the case, as the report notes, there has been cruise ships operating in international waters fall under a complex web of overlapping jurisdictions. While the FBI can assert authority once a U.S. citizen is harmed, certain categories of records, including the full passenger manifest and registration documents, technically remain under the flag state's control. In the case of the Carnival Horizon, that jurisdiction belongs to Panama. Under maritime law, federal agents may request these documents formally, but doing so triggers a lengthy diplomatic process that involves the Panamanian Maritime Authority, the ship's registry office, and the International Maritime Organization. Given the already unusual silence around the case, as the report notes, there has been no official word about what is going on in that case. The FBI may have decided that invoking formal mechanisms through Panama would slow the investigation further. Instead, the Bureau appears to have relied on Carnival's voluntary cooperation, a process in which the cruise line provides internal records, surveillance footage, key logs, staff witness statements, and passenger movement data without requiring external government intervention. However, Relying solely on voluntary cooperation is not without risks. Cruise lines have an inherent interest in limiting liability, protecting brand reputation, and avoiding negative publicity. While Carnival provide the documents the FBI requests, it is not obligated to surrender the entirety of its registry unless compelled by a formal order routed through Panama. This means any information the company chooses not to emphasize, such as discrepancies in cabin assignments, keycard anomalies, or staff logs, may never enter the investigative record unless federal agents insist on a full manifest review via diplomatic channels. The decision to avoid Panama's formal registry process may reflect a strategic calculation speed and access over completeness, but in a case already marked by procedural gaps and unprecedented delays, the reliance on voluntary cooperation from Carnival only deepens concerns about whether every relevant piece of information has truly been secured. In any cruise ship death with potential criminal elements, the CCTV system is one of the most critical sources of evidence. Most Carnival vessels are equipped with high-resolution cameras that automatically store footage for 7 to 30 days, and the system cannot be manually erased without deliberate intervention from onboard security. For that reason, the disappearance of 4 video segments between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. on November 7, the same window in which Anna is believed to have died, has become one of the biggest red flags in the case. Maritime investigative sources note that missing CCTV segments generally occur under only 3 circumstances: a synchronization or storage failure, a deliberate manual deletion, an authorized suppression requested by an external agency, rare and always documented. In Anna's case, Carnival has issued no technical explanations, and the FBI has never confirmed requesting any restrictions on access. This vacuum has led the public to question whether the missing data is coincidental or part of a broader pattern of irregularities, including the concealed remains, the delayed cabin lockdown, the stalled toxicology report, and the blank death certificate. The report underscores this ongoing opacity, stating, "We are continuing to get some more information." Yet that information is arriving not from the FBI or from Carnival, but from unrelated custody filings and civil court documents. With camera footage, the most objective evidence available, suddenly missing during the most critical 4-hour window, the investigation is forced into a gray zone. Without video, investigators lose the ability to confirm who entered cabin 2408, the suspect's movements, the moment the remains was concealed under the bed, whether a third party was present. The disappearance of these 4 segments is not simply a technical failure, it is a critical breakdown in evidence preservation, one that fundamentally alters the trajectory of the entire case. As early as the 2nd day after the ship docked, information emerged from the family indicating that the juvenile suspect was experiencing a mental health crisis. His hospitalization and reported psychological distress were highlighted as part of the overall picture, but not as a basis for drawing conclusions or assigning blame. Given that no autopsy findings or official FBI statements had been released at that time, the early focus on mental health may reflect a legal protective approach for a minor suspect, rather than an attempt to define the nature of the incident. It remains one element of an incomplete narrative. How the murder case was exposed. The divorce case Hudson vs. Hudson, filed under 05-2024 DRO 456-79, is one of the most significant legal elements needed to understand the broader context of the Anna Kepner investigation. The first striking detail is the timings. The petition was filed only 28 days before the family embarked on the Carnival Horizon. This indicates that the family was already in a period of legal, financial, and custodial upheaval, which helps explain why the divorce documents have become the most revealing source of information in the case, even though, by nature, they are not directly related. As the report states, the proximity between the filing date and the cruise cannot be overlooked. When a couple enters a contested custody phase, the supervision and management of minors often becomes more complicated, especially in blended families whose roles, boundaries, and authority structures are still unstable. This becomes even more relevant given that the cabin Anna shared included children from 2 different household structures. Additionally, in custody disputes, each party often seeks to highlight or collect information unfavorable to the other. Thus, the sudden appearance of details such as references to murder, notes on the stepson's psychological state, and the push to seal the case may reflect legal strategy by one or both parties rather than a direct recounting of events aboard the ship. The fact that the divorce was filed only 28 days before the trip creates a unique backdrop. A family in legal tension entering a confined space together, where shared cabins, blurred supervision, and family instability may have contributed to the tragedy. The Hudson vs. Hudson case has therefore become an inseparable piece of the puzzle, explaining why civil documents now contain more meaningful information than the criminal records still withheld by the FBI. Once that 17 documents in the Hudson vs. Hudson case had remained sealed for 9 months, yet were suddenly unsealed right after Anna's death. The timing raises significant questions, as records long buried within a civil custody dispute unexpectedly became key sources of information for a fatal incident at sea. The court's abrupt decision to lift the seal may reflect a need for transparency between the parties, or it may indicate that those documents unexpectedly gained relevance to the federal investigation. Either way, the unsealing marks a pivotal shift in how the civil and criminal contexts intersect. In the days following Anna Kepner's death, the legal landscape surrounding the Kepner-Hudson family erupted in a way few could have foreseen. It was as though a series of dormant tensions suddenly broke the surface all at once. The first domino in this chain reaction was the emergency motion for custody, filed by Thomas Hudson on November 17, 2025, only 10 days after the tragedy aboard the Carnival Horizon. Emergency custody motions are not uncommon in contentious divorces, but this one contained a single line that reshaped the entire public understanding of the case. "My son is the only suspect in a federal homicide investigation." This was the first time any public document explicitly identified Sauce's son as the sole suspect in the federal investigation into Anna's death. Up to this point, the public only had fragments. Anna had been staying in a cabin with 2 boys. The FBI maintained complete silence, the medical examiner withheld the cause of death, and the cruise line avoided commenting. And yet the decisive revelation didn't come from the FBI, Miami-Dade authorities, or Carnival. It came from a civil divorce filing. This raised a serious question. How did Thomas Hudson become so confident that his son was the primary target of a federal investigation? Did he receive direct information from investigators? Did his legal team interpret certain behaviors as signals? Or was he reacting to information shared privately within the blended family? Regardless of the origin, the timing of his emergency motion reveals a sense of urgency, that he believed the legal stakes for his son had become immediate and severe. Almost immediately after Thomas filed the motion, Chantel Hudson responded by submitting 3 separate gag order requests, each citing the safety of my son. Yet Judge Jennifer Taylor denied all 3. This was a highly unusual outcome, especially considering the involvement of a minor and heightened media scrutiny. But from the court's perspective, Chantel's argument did not meet the threshold required to restrict public access. A gag order can only be granted when there is clear evidence of imminent danger, or when open access to documents would inflict direct harm on a child's legal rights. Chantel presented no evidence of threats, and fears of public pressure do not qualify as grounds to suspend the public's right to access civil records. Furthermore, the documents in question were part of a standard custody dispute, not criminal evidence, making the argument for sealing even weaker. At a moment when the FBI had not released a single detail, suddenly sealing family court records could be perceived as an attempt to control the narrative, rather than protect the child. Yet while Thomas and Chantel were locked in their own legal battle, a third development emerged that further complicated the picture. Christopher Kepner, Anna's biological father, was unexpectedly summoned to testify in a completely separate custody dispute involving his third wife. What raised eyebrows was not merely his involvement in another custody case, but the timing of his subpoena. It coincided exactly with the date many believed the FBI might reveal an indictment in Anna's case. Why would Christopher be called to testify at such a sensitive moment? A possible answer lies in the strategic nature of family law. The report provided an important clue. In other words, opposing counsel in that unrelated custody case sought to leverage any potential witness who could influence the court's perception of the mother's fitness. And Christopher, who was physically present on the cruise and among the last people to see Anna alive, suddenly became a person of great legal value. His presence at the scene of a highly publicized tragedy amplified the weight of his testimony. The overlap between his subpoena and the anticipated timeline of the federal case created a rare collision between civil and criminal spheres. If Christopher testified under oath, he might inadvertently reveal details tied to the federal investigation, or his testimony might influence how the civil court interpreted the Hudson family's stability and parental judgment. Conversely, the FBI may have had to delay the release of key findings if one of their central witnesses was simultaneously navigating a state-level custody hearing. Whether coincidental or strategic, this convergence underscored a deeper reality. Anna's death did not simply trigger a federal investigation, it destabilized an entire network of family legal proceedings across multiple households. The emergency motion, the rejected gag orders, and the subpoena of Christopher Kepner collectively reveal a landscape where civil courts, family tensions, and federal investigators are entangled far more tightly than in a typical homicide case. In the end, these legal developments illuminate one truth. The tragedy aboard the Carnival Horizon did not occur in a vacuum. Instead, it detonated along fault lines that were already under strain: custody disputes, blended family dynamics, and competing parental claims, transforming what should have been a single investigation into a sprawling, multi-court, multi-family crisis. The ripple effects of Anna's death now stretch far beyond the ship where it happened, pulling 3 families and 3 courts into a complex legal web that continues to unravel in real time. During the review of the Hudson filings after the documents were unsealed, one particularly striking irregularity emerged. 14 appendix pages had been deliberately edited. The name, Anna Kepner, was completely removed from every page, yet critical contextual details, including the cabin number, the exact time of death, and key timestamps from the night of November 7, remained untouched. This selective redaction raises an immediate question: why erase Anna's name while preserving the framework of the events surrounding her death? In standard court practice, when the intention is to protect a minor or conceal sensitive data, all identifying information is obscured: names, cabin numbers, timestamps, and descriptive markers about the location of death. But these 14 pages were edited in a manner that kept the structure, removed the identity, suggesting that the alterations were likely carried out by a party to the case, rather than by a court clerk following formal redaction protocol. The fact that the cabin number and time of death were left intact indicates the appendices still served a purpose in the custody dispute, even if the family sought to avoid publicly associating those details with Anna. Complicating matters further, while major news outlets such as Fox, NBC, and ABC still lacked clear information, legal networks like Court TV and Law and Crime suddenly began broadcasting highly specific details: the cabin number, the timeline, and the alleged behavior of the stepson. These particulars could not have come from the FBI, which remained silent, nor from Carnival, which avoids disclosing sensitive operational data. So where did the leak originate? Observers have proposed 3 plausible sources. The first, attorneys from either side of the divorce, who had privileged access to the court documents before they were publicly released. The second, a party seeking narrative advantage, using legal-focused media outlets to sway public perception. The last, an internal court employee, given that the documents were temporarily unsealed. What stands out is that Court TV and Law Crime received details that matched exactly the information preserved in the edited appendices: cabin number, timestamps, and contextual movements, but not any physical evidence. This mirrors the contents of the 14 altered pages so closely that the most credible explanation is that the leak came from someone with a direct legal interest in how the public understood the case. The alignment between what was erased in the official documents and what was broadcast on legal networks suggests a strategic intention. Someone wanted Anna's name removed from the formal record, yet wanted the public fully aware of the circumstances surrounding her death. It is the kind of leak crafted to protect legal positioning while steering public opinion in a particular direction. 4. Family network. As the investigation into Anna Kepner's death grew increasingly opaque, online discussions and legal forums began to scrutinize adults and family networks surrounding her life. This emerging scrutiny was not driven by confirmed facts or official disclosures, but rather by a public attempting to interpret a tragedy to fragments of information, civil court filings, and social media speculation. With the FBI silent and the medical examiner withholding basic findings, the public vacuum became fertile ground for questions, especially regarding the Kepner-Hudson family. One of the earliest and most frequently discussed figures in these conversations is Christopher Kepner, Anna's biological father. Across various online platforms, users circulated non-official documents and excerpts from old custody disputes, suggesting that he had gone through 3 marriages and had faced 2 prior allegations involving inappropriate behavior with minors. Each of these allegations, as the circulated documents note, was either not substantiated or dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Crucially, no law enforcement agency has ever concluded that Christopher committed any such offense, and none of these claims originate from official investigative records. Still, the fact that such allegations existed, even as unverified or dismissed, led the public to wonder whether past concerns within the family environment were overlooked or minimized. Parallel to this, attention also turned toward Chantel Hudson, Anna's stepmother. Within local Cocoa Beach community groups, several posts claimed that Chantel was connected to an informal social circle referred to colloquially as a stepmom club. Some users alleged that this group included individuals with prior or current positions in maritime security, including, in some versions of the rumor, someone said to have ties to Carnival's security operations. However, no public record confirms any direct link between Chantel Hudson and any Carnival security official. These narratives instead represent a common pattern in high-profile cases. The public assembles a mosaic of loosely connected details, social acquaintances, or occupational coincidences and interprets them as part of a broader web. Whether true or not, the rumors raise the question if Chantel did have relationships within the cruise security sector. Could those connections have influenced how the case unfolded? The most intense speculation, however, has surrounded T.H., the 16-year-old stepbrother who was in the cabin with Anna on the night of her death. On Reddit, YouTube, Facebook groups, and Discord threads, numerous users claimed that T.H. had a history of mental health treatment beginning in 2022, and that he had been suspended or expelled from school for behavior described, often vaguely, as controlling, coercive, or sexually inappropriate. All of these claims remain completely unverified. None are supported by law enforcement statements, school records, or court documents. They originate from anonymous accounts, screenshot chains, or word-of-mouth summaries within online communities. Nevertheless, the persistence of these rumors raises a reasonable public question. If T.H. had experienced behavioral or mental health challenges, were there systems in place to address them? And if these stories are entirely false, why did they attach themselves to him so quickly? High-profile investigations often generate such narratives because the absence of affirmation allows speculation to rush in and fill the void. In Anna's case, the void is enormous: no cause of death, no official suspect naming, no timeline clarification, no Carnival report, and no psychological evaluation disclosed. Supporters of the Hudson counter these narratives by arguing that the rumors represent nothing more than a wave of online defamation. They insist that no mental health records exist, that the school expulsion claims are fabricated, and that T.H. is simply a shy, socially vulnerable teenager who experienced a severe psychological reaction to a traumatic event. These defenders argue that painting him as dangerous or pathological is both unfair and unsupported by evidence. What both sides agree on, however, is that the lack of transparency from authorities is fueling the confusion. The FBI has not released any findings. The medical examiner has withheld the cause of death. Carnival has avoided commenting on the case. With no official narrative to anchor the public's understanding, unverified claims begin to carry more weight, simply because they are the only narratives available. Ultimately, the speculation surrounding Christopher, Chantel, and T.H. does not confirm anything about their involvement or personal histories, but it does reveal the context in which Anna lived: a blended family with multiple legal disputes, overlapping custody battles, and interpersonal dynamics that outsiders can only guess at. In a case defined by sealed documents, missing camera footage, and a prolonged investigative silence, these unanswered questions have transformed Anna's death from a maritime tragedy into a complex portrait of family, community rumor, and public uncertainty. As the public searched for answers in the death of 18-year-old Anna Kepner, new layers of speculation began circulating about prior incidents within the family, disputed funeral dynamics, and tensions with individuals close to Anna. None of these narratives have been confirmed by authorities, yet their persistence illustrates the growing distrust surrounding those connected to the case. One of the most frequently discussed stories online involves an alleged incident in 2024, in which the 16-year-old stepbrother, T.H., was said to have climbed into Anna's bed while she was asleep. According to circulating social media discussions, the family reportedly dismissed the situation as childish joking or harmless sibling behavior. These accounts cannot be independently verified, and the family has not commented publicly on the matter. Still, for many observers, the alleged incident, if it happened, raises questions about boundaries and supervision within a blended household already marked by custody disputes and shifting parental roles. In the absence of clarity from the adults involved, this unconfirmed story has become part of the broader public conversation about whether warning signs may have existed long before the cruise. A second narrative gaining traction online concerns Anna's biological mother, Heather Kepner, and her limited participation in her daughter's funeral services. Multiple posts and community threads allege that Heather was barred from attending parts of the ceremonies and was threatened with legal action if she attempted to speak publicly about the case. These claims remain unsubstantiated, with no public documentation supporting them. Even so, commentators have questioned whether the family was attempting to control the narrative around Anna's death by restricting the involvement of individuals who might contradict the official family messaging. Whether this reflects genuine legal positioning, long-standing interpersonal hostilities within the family, or simply internet exaggeration, remains unknown. What is clear is that Heather's near-total public silence has intensified speculation by those who believe she was pushed aside during the most emotionally significant moment of her daughter's life and death. The third cluster of claims revolves around Josh II, Anna's ex-boyfriend, who became a figure of interest for online investigators after stellar shots of text messages allegedly sent by Anna surfaced shortly after her death. According to circulating allegations, the Kepner family was displeased that Josh shared these messages publicly and allegedly hired a private investigator to monitor him or track his communications. Again, none of these assertions can be independently verified, and no investigator has been identified. Supporters of the family argue that this narrative is implausible, insisting that private investigations are expensive and unnecessary when the FBI is already involved. However, others contend that families, under extreme scrutiny, sometimes resort to unofficial channels to protect their reputation or gather information outside law enforcement oversight. With no confirmation from Josh or the family, the story remains purely speculative, but its existence reflects the unusually adversarial environment that formed around Anna's social relationships after her death. Finally, significant public attention has turned toward the actions of Barbara and Jeffrey Kepner, Anna's maternal grandparents. Despite declining interview requests from major U.S. media outlets, including broadcast networks and national newspapers, unverified reports claim they sent a folder of documents, photos, or personal statements to Daily Mail UK, a tabloid known for amplifying high-profile family conflicts. The motivation behind allegedly cooperating with a foreign tabloid rather than domestic investigative outlets is unknown, and the family has not clarified the accuracy of these claims. If true, some observers argue it could indicate an attempt to bypass local scrutiny or to share their perspective with an outlet less restrained by U.S. journalistic conventions. Others believe it reflects frustration with American media's slow pace of reporting amid a tightly controlled FBI investigation. Without confirmation, however, these remain theories fueled by the inconsistencies in the family's media engagement. When viewed collectively, these four narrative threads, an alleged 2024 bedroom incident, the funeral access controversy, the supposed surveillance of an ex-boyfriend, and the ambiguous cooperation with international media, paint a picture not of confirmed wrongdoing, but of profound public uncertainty. The themes are consistent fractured communication, inconsistent messaging, strained relationships, and the perception, whether warranted or not, that certain adults may be managing information selectively. These unverified claims continue to spread for a reason. The FBI has not provided clarity. The medical examiner has withheld the cause and manner of death. Carnival has offered no meaningful transparency about what happened on board. In the void left by institutions, public speculation has become the dominant framework through which Anna's story is interpreted. The longer the silence continues, the more these unconfirmed accounts, some likely exaggerated, some possibly rooted in truth, gain traction and shape the collective understanding of the case. It is precisely this environment of opacity that makes every rumor appear more plausible than it should. Without official answers, the public commentators, former classmates, online analysts, and even distant observers are left to construct meaning from fragments. The narratives involving Christopher, Chantel, Heather, Josh, and Anna's parents may be incomplete, disputed, or distorted, but they reveal something unmistakable. A family under intense pressure, navigating loss, conflict, and scrutiny, and a public desperate to understand what truly happened to Anna. Disinformation campaign. In the early days following Anna Kepner's death aboard the Carnival Horizon, the media narrative followed a familiar and almost formulaic pattern. Between November 6th and November 12th, nearly every headline framed Anna in the language reserved for idealized American youth, the straight-A cheerleader with a bright future. In fact, a review of coverage from these 6 days shows that 100% of published articles used variations of this descriptor, painting Anna as the quintessential all-American teenager whose life was tragically cut short. This type of framing is not accidental. It is a well-documented journalistic reflex meant to anchor public sympathy, reduce controversy, and establish a moral baseline before more complex details emerge. During this phase, the attention remained fixed solely on Anna's promise and the suddenness of her death, with no explicit references to family complications, potential suspects, or investigative challenges. But a striking shift occurred in the second week. Between November 13th and November 20th, newspapers and digital outlets began employing a noticeably different lexicon. Phrases like blended family struggles, teen mental health crisis, and complex household dynamics entered circulation. These terms functioned subtly but powerfully. They reframed the tragedy from a purely external event into one that might have roots within the family itself. This rhetorical pivot had two effects. First, it diluted the earlier, clean-cut portrait of Anna's life by suggesting internal instability. Second, it shifted sympathy away from a purely victim-centered narrative and toward context building, often a precursor to preparing the public for revelations involving someone close to the victim. During this period, several analysts noted that the tone of coverage became noticeably softer toward potential suspects, particularly juveniles. Reports began emphasizing themes such as adolescent emotional volatility, behavioral struggles, and the pressures of growing up in blended households. It mirrored a pattern seen in other high-profile cases where the press begins seeding a narrative scaffold long before law enforcement confirms any information. Whether coincidental or strategically guided, the messaging trajectory was clear: reduce the sense of deliberate wrongdoing, increase the perception of systemic or psychological complexity. The third shift emerged between November 21st and November 27th, and it was the most dramatic. A headline audit from national and regional media during this window revealed that 68% of news titles included terms like stepbrother or juvenile suspect. In other words, the focus had fully migrated away from Anna's identity and toward the internal conflicts of the adults around her and the looming possibility of a family-linked suspect. By this point, the media had largely moved from soft human interest storytelling into a forensic, conflict-driven frame. The narrative was no longer Anna, the promising teenager, but the stepbrother, the custody fight, and the silence of investigators. Notably, this shift did not follow new information from the FBI, Carnival, or the medical examiner, all of whom remained silent. Instead, the tonal change appeared to track closely with the release of unrelated family court documents and the growing circulation of secondary reports, interviews, and leaked materials. It is in this context that observers began to question whether external messaging specialists were shaping the trajectory of public perception. Which brings us to Precision Strategies, a well-known crisis communications firm, reported to have been contracted by Carnival on November 8, less than 24 hours after Anna's body was discovered. Precision Strategies is a heavyweight in the PR world, known for political campaigns, Fortune 50 corporate crises, and high-risk reputational management. When such a firm becomes involved, its mission is not to manipulate facts, but to reshape the frame through which the public receives those facts. Crisis PR firms typically do not address the public directly. Instead, they influence which talking points are emphasized, which narratives are deprioritized, how corporate partners respond, and how media outlets interpret the absence of official information. In the week after Precision Strategies was reportedly brought on board, 3 observable outcomes aligned with standard crisis PR playbooks. The first, de-escalation of corporate exposure. Carnival all but disappeared from the headlines after November 9th. Early stories mentioning the cruise line's responsibility, safety protocols, or room assignment practices quickly vanished. This suggests a deliberate containment strategy. The next, narrative diffusion attention shifted from the cruise line to dynamics within the Kepner-Hudson family. Courts, custody disputes, and juvenile mental health appeared increasingly in news cycles. Crisis PR strategists often redirect attention toward social complexity and individual circumstances, a pattern that became pronounced in this case. The last, reframing the suspect. Media framing of the stepbrother moved from unmentioned to contextually humanized, with emphasis on mental health struggles, familial instability, and juvenile vulnerability. This is a classic risk mitigation strategy. If public outrage cannot be eliminated, it can be redistributed. Of course, none of this proves that precision strategies actively engineered the media shifts. But the timing is conspicuous. Each phase of the narrative pivot, from idealized victim to blended family complexity to juvenile suspect framing, aligns neatly with crisis communication tactics used to reduce corporate liability and temper public anger. What remains undeniable is the consequence. By late November, Anna herself had become a secondary figure in the story of her own death. The public conversation had been reframed around custody disputes, psychological narratives, and procedural ambiguity. Whether guided or organic, the effect was the same: a shift away from the cruise line's responsibility and toward a murky portrait of family conflict. In a case defined by silence from officials, the evolution of the media narrative may be the clearest indicator of who is shaping the story behind the scenes. A particularly revealing moment in the evolution of the Anna Kepner media narrative occurred on November 22, when 41 news articles published within the same 24-hour period used the exact phrasing. Sources close to the family say the boy is devastated. The uniformity of this sentence, repeated verbatim across national, regional, and digital outlets, strongly suggests the coordinated release of a single talking point rather than independent reporting. In the world of crisis communication, this technique is known as sympathy seeding, the early introduction of emotional framing designed to humanize an individual who may later face public suspicion. By emphasizing the stepbrother's alleged emotional collapse, the narrative subtly reoriented from forensic inquiry toward empathy. Importantly, no article identified these sources, leaving open the question of whether the phrase originated from legitimate family confidence, legal counsel, or crisis PR intermediaries. At the same time, another controversy emerged: the abrupt shutdown of the Kepner family's GoFundMe, which raised $187,000 in just 48 hours before being removed with the label "violation of violence-related policy." GoFundMe has not publicly clarified the exact reason for the removal, though such actions typically occur when fundraisers appear linked to active criminal investigations, disputed narratives, or alleged misuse of victim-based fundraising. The shutdown rapidly became a focal point for online debate. Supporters argued the family was being unfairly scrutinized during a period of profound grief, while critics questioned the fundraiser's timing, purpose, and transparency. The disappearance of the page without an official explanation left a vacuum, soon filled by speculation. Was GoFundMe reacting to law enforcement concerns, community reporting, or did inconsistencies in the fundraiser trigger automated detection? This uncertainty mixed with the ongoing media reframing created a fertile ground for the final shift, the social media narrative overwrite that occurred between November 23 and 27. Social media threads reflected the same trend. Discussions moved away from evidence-based analysis toward debates about juvenile psychological development, parental stress, and inter-household conflict. While these topics are valid on their own, their sudden dominance effectively crowded out conversations centered on Anna herself. Some users observed that posts questioning investigative decisions were quietly downvoted or overshadowed, while emotionally sympathetic content about a family shattered rose to the top. This pattern mirrors known algorithmic behavior in high-profile cases, where emotionally heavy narratives outperform analytical ones, especially when someone, whether organically or intentionally, amplifies them. Ultimately, the combined effect of these developments, the coordinated, devastated boy messaging, the unexplained collapse of a six-figure GoFundMe, and the algorithmic rewriting of the social media conversation, created a landscape in which the focus drifted away from justice for Anna and toward the emotional welfare of those around her. Whether this shift emerged naturally through collective grief or was subtly guided by reputation managers, its impact is undeniable. By late November, public attention no longer revolved around the central question of what happened, but around the softer narrative of how the family felt. Predict the outcome. As the investigation into Anna Kepner's death continues without official clarity, legal analysts and online researchers have begun to outline the most plausible endgames based on Florida statute, federal maritime law, and the handling of prior cruise ship fatalities involving minors. Each scenario varies in consequence, but all share a common theme. The outcome may ultimately hinge less on forensic discovery and more on jurisdiction, classification, and the strategic decisions of the adults surrounding the case. The first and most widely discussed possibility involves the stepbrother being processed through Florida's juvenile justice system. Under Florida law, even in cases involving severe bodily harm or death, if prosecutors decline to direct file the minor into adult court, the maximum penalty for juveniles is limited to 3 years in a high-security juvenile commitment facility, followed by supervised release until age 21. This means that if the case were formally classified as a juvenile homicide, the legal exposure would be drastically lower than the public might assume. Factors such as psychological evaluations, family stability, and the minor's prior behavioral history often influence whether prosecutors escalate a juvenile into adult court. If the narrative continues to emphasize emotional instability, mental health struggles, or blended family stressors, the likelihood of adult prosecution diminishes. In such a scenario, public outrage may be extensive, but the legal consequences would remain capped at the statutory ceiling. The second scenario centers on classification drift, the possibility that the case could ultimately be ruled as death by misadventure or undetermined. These classifications are not uncommon in maritime deaths involving unclear circumstances, limited physical evidence, or conflicting accounts from individuals present on board. Analysts speculate that if the family reaches a civil agreement with Carnival, the pressure to release definitive findings may decrease. Civil settlements in maritime cases often contain confidentiality provisions, which can indirectly incentivize a shift toward non-committal or ambiguous forensic conclusions. An undetermined classification allows all parties to avoid assigning intentionality or blame, while misadventure frames the event as accidental, a designation used in several cruise cases over the past decade. Such an outcome would effectively neutralize criminal liability, but leave ongoing public suspicion unresolved. The third and final scenario involves the permanent sealing of the FBI case file under federal juvenile privacy protections. If a minor is identified, even informally, as a subject, person of interest, or potential witness, federal agencies can invoke juvenile privacy statutes to restrict public access to records indefinitely. This includes interviews, surveillance analysis, forensic reports, and internal investigative memos. In several past FBI cases involving minors on cruise ships, files were sealed for decades, outlasting even civil litigation. If invoked here, it would mean the public may never see the full investigative timeline, the FBI's reconstruction of the night, or any internal conclusions about what occurred in cabin 104-8. This scenario grows more plausible if law enforcement believes releasing information could cause harm to a minor or disrupt future rehabilitation efforts. Together, these three pathways represent the most structurally consistent outcomes given the current silence from authorities, the involvement of a juvenile, and the unique complexities of maritime jurisdiction. While the public may desire a definitive explanation or transparent justice, the eventual resolution may instead fall into one of these legally insulated categories, each prioritizing procedural containment over public clarity. If the case continues along the trajectory seen in recent weeks, many observers believe the next chapter may unfold not in a courtroom, but in the private decisions of those closest to the investigation. One widely discussed possibility is that Christopher and Chantel Kepner may eventually relocate out of Florida within 6 months, motivated by the intense regional scrutiny, ongoing custody disputes, and the discomfort of living in a community where speculation has become inseparable from their daily lives. Such moves are common in high-profile family cases, not as an admission of wrongdoing, but as a means of psychological reset, an attempt to rebuild anonymity elsewhere when public attention becomes suffocating. Looking further ahead, some analysts predict an even broader cultural shift, the likelihood that a documentary adaptation, perhaps by a platform like Netflix, may emerge within the next decade. If past cases are any indication, The story could easily be reframed not around the victim, but around the emotional complexity of the minor involved. Media outlets often gravitate toward narratives of adolescent turmoil, mental health crises, and family collapse because they offer a digestible psychological arc. In this projection, Anna risks becoming a secondary figure in the retelling of her own tragedy, replaced by a softer, more audience-palatable framing of a troubled boy caught in a tragedy he could not understand. This anticipated narrative shift is not unique to this case. It reflects a broader cultural tendency to humanize minors while unintentionally minimizing the visibility of victims. Another concern often raised in forensic discussion circles is the disappearance of key evidence over time. Cruise line surveillance systems frequently overwrite data within weeks, unless law enforcement extracts and preserves them immediately. If mishandled, the ship's hard drive, which potentially contained hours of hallway or corridor footage, could be permanently lost. Likewise, biological samples, such as trace DNA found under fingernails, degrade quickly without proper storage or prioritization in processing queues. Digital communications, including deleted text messages from November 6, become increasingly difficult to recover as devices update, memory blocks shift, or accounts are closed. None of this implies intentional destruction. Rather, it illustrates how fragile evidence becomes in maritime investigations that span multiple jurisdictions and agencies. Which leads to the final and most emotionally charged concern raised by many following the case, the idea that victims can experience a second form of erasure. Not through violence, but through institutional silence. In this metaphorical framing, Anna Kepner risks becoming a victim twice. First through the tragedy aboard the Carnival Horizon, and again through the gradual fading of her story, within a system that prioritizes juvenile privacy, family reputation, and corporate liability over public clarity. This second disappearance is not a legal conclusion, nor an accusation, when reflection of how narratives shift when investigations stagnate, evidence dissipates, and institutions close their doors behind sealed files. When the focus moves increasingly toward protecting the emotional well-being of involved minors, or the reputational concerns of adults, the life of the actual victim can be pushed to the margins. In the end, this scenario is not about guilt or innocence. It is about how easily truth becomes obscured in cases involving overlapping jurisdictions, corporate entities, and vulnerable minors. And the fear shared by many observers is simple: that Anna's voice may one day vanish, not because answers are impossible, but because the systems responsible for providing those answers choose not to speak.